Welcome, everyone. My name is Atin. For those who don't know me, I am the CEO and co-founder of Countable. But today, we're not talking about Countable. We're talking about something very close to my heart, a topic that I think everybody has been talking rigorously in the last year, mental health. The speaker we have today has a process that he'd like to share that will help you maybe fine-tune some of the things that you're already doing in this process. But before we move on to that, ICAEW, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, and similar other institutes around the globe have put out some stats, which was shocking to me around mental health for accountants. They said nearly 1/3 suffers from mental health issue, which is about 30.4% for accountants who like the precise numbers. 30.4% suffer from mental health issues of some kind. And more than half, which is 51%, admitting to depression and anxiety specifically. 2 of the 5 accountants believe their job was the key contributor to their poor mental health. There's so much to talk about. I'm not going to take enough time. I'd like to introduce our speaker, who is someone who's got master's in counseling psychology. Sorry, I have to read my notes. He's got too much going on, so I won't remember by memory. He worked with companies like Amazon, Hyundai, Canada's largest school board, City of Toronto. He ran a full session with over 300 people, and so many other organizations who has benefited from his 5C program, which we're going to talk in more detail a little bit later. He has been awarded a Global Problem Solver and Innovative Exemplary Practice Award. He gets regularly featured in Canadian national news, and he's presented numerous occasions with over 50,000 live audiences. So please welcome Mike Stroh.
It's great to be here. And yeah, my experience, what starts with me, was really born out of my personal and family catastrophes with mental illness, addiction, and then the subsequent recovery joys and the life I get to currently live now. So I eat, sleep, breathe, and live all of this stuff. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I am grateful for this opportunity.
From your perspective, if you have to prioritize mental health during this busy time of the year without really burning out, what are some of the key factors that people have to look at when we're just talking about workplace? Currently, we're talking about more as an organization. Maybe later on, we'll touch base in an individual for mental health and how that works. But just from an organization perspective, some of the leaders of the organization, what are some of the things they should be doing around this?
I think the first thing is to just acknowledge the perhaps unrealistic assumptions. So in all of our work over the years, what we've really noticed is that companies tend to make a few standard mistakes. So the first one is they think they need a big budget and that they lack human resources to initiate any type of mental health programming in the workplace. They think that, so if they move beyond that assumption and then they say, okay, we're going to invest in something, then they think, oh, online training or online education is enough. And then they also think that that awareness or information given to human beings is enough to impact behavior. And then they're also unaware of the profound impact on productivity, performance, group dynamics, and so those are kind of the barriers. So first, just to acknowledge those.
Yep.
And then there's also a difficult understanding between the difference between mental health and mental illness. And so the way we deal with stress is different than how we would support someone who's really in the grips of a mental illness or something like that. You know, if the fire alarms are going off, it's in some sense already too late. So you want to try to implement best practices or guidelines prior to shit hitting the proverbial fan. So what does that look like? And I think that looks like an environment where people are comfortable being honest about what's going on with them. And usually that starts from the top. So it needs to be role modeled from leadership. And if leadership role models a sense of humility and vulnerability, then the rest tend to follow. So the first thing really is just to say, again, it can depend on the individual, the group, the work environment, but leadership role modeling, taking a break, right? Or bringing in, I don't know, a mindfulness teacher, or it doesn't really matter what it is, but just to do something and say, hey, everybody, we value this. And we're not just saying it, we're showing you with our actions.
Yeah.
So I know we all have 500 things on the to-do list, but I don't care. We're all going to take the afternoon off, or we're going to have a break here, or whatever it is. But it's sort of just about doing something and not talking about it. Everybody has a different baseline, so to speak. So I think understanding what our normal date, quote unquote, normal day-to-day functioning looks like. So perhaps for individual A, I tend to be incredibly punctual. I'm always in a suit and tie. I never spill coffee on myself, those type of things. I'm very kind of organized in that sense. So for that person, that's their baseline. They're punctual, they're clean cut, all that kind of stuff. That's how they go about their business. Another person might be more casual. They might have coffee stains on their shirt. They might not be as punctual, those type of things. And so we'll use those two people as a frame. That's a baseline, person A, person B. And then, of course, there's people in between that. Yeah. So that's the baseline. So if person A, who's very clean cut, dresses in a suit, etc., very punctual, if they start to be late frequently, consistently, if they start showing up in very casual clothes all of a sudden, so it's the distinct changes in a behavior, in a mood, in a personality, in an appearance that is quite out of the norm for what their normal way of being is. Yeah. And so say you could take it to the other side, right? The person who's much more casual, et cetera. If all of a sudden they're showing up in three-piece tuxes and they're, wiping every little mark off every little desk or whatever, then that's a distinct change in that person's baseline. And it doesn't always mean there's something wrong, but it's an indicator that there might be something going on.
So this is interesting. We establish a baseline as an organization, and then new people are coming in. The culture is always changing. And so how important it is to monitor against that baseline, and can it be scientifically documented in some form or the other, whatever that is? And because, accountants, we are all numbers people. We love to put a perspective. It says, I am this in this category, and then I know what that is. So is there a way to put a structure around it so people can easily follow that process and say, let's do a monitoring and check up on every couple of months to see whether people are off or not, and so on?
It does start with getting clear on how do we even measure mental health, so to speak. So I think on a metrics perspective, we can start to gather information. You might want to do an audit in some sense, or that's an accounting word, isn't it?
I'm almost converting them into accountant very soon.
Yeah. Part of the conversation that is also not clearly articulated is that nobody has really, and when I say nobody, large organizations in the world, even the large government organizations that are pushing for advancement in workplace mental health, nobody has a database of information that's been tracked over a long period of time. So this is all relatively new. There is a lot of evidence that it can be incredibly powerful and profitable for companies to start taking this seriously. So that's encouraging. And it starts with, are we actually spending any money on employee engagement around mental health and well-being? Yep. How much have we spent? Is there training going on? So you start tracking that. And then you can start tracking, and I'm sure I'll miss a few of the columns, but you can start tracking how much money are we spending on benefits? How much money are we spending on employee assistance programs? How many sick days are people taking? Are people spending? I know one company I worked with, they noticed that their pharmaceutical spending was really high.
Mm-hmm.
And then they looked into the nature of the pharmaceuticals. So it's obviously not always related to mental health, but they found out 40% of the company costs on pharmaceuticals were going towards antidepressants.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that's pretty profound. And so you can start, if you really have the intention, you can get a lot of great information. And then it's like, okay, well, where's the low-hanging fruit, right? So maybe it's, and then you pick that, and then maybe you start there. But I think that first phase of getting clarity, I like the word inventory, kind of we're doing an inventory on what's going on here in relationship to mental health. And then you start making decisions from there.
Can you talk about your 5C program a little bit?
Sure.
I think I'm curious to know more about it. And I think it might help put some structure into what we just talked about to see if what the process usually you follow for large organizations to help them get organized in the mental health.
Yeah. So we have our sort of 5C program is how to create mentally healthy teams that are connected, effective, and purpose-driven. And it's our creative, I guess, also quite well thought out solution to how an organization might implement a workplace mental health strategy. The first one is clarity. So that's similar to what I was just describing, doing the internal audit, the inventory, where are we spending money, what's going on here. Step two is courage. So we have an understanding of what's happening. Do we have the courage? Another people sometimes prefer the word commitment. Can we make the commitment, or do we have the courage to actually start implementing changes? Because the benefits are not quarterly, right? Which is another huge problem with our current kind of short-term interest business structures, is that we anyway, not everyone's like that, of course. So we get courage. Okay, here's the problems we've identified. Here's the holes. Let's move forward. Then the third step, the third C, is creativity. So we've got clarity. We're committed to going through it. Let's use our creativity to imagine what we could actually do here, what can be different, what can change. The fourth C is constancy, which is a beautiful word, in my opinion. It's a blend of patience and persistence. So, of course, when you're implementing new plans, and particularly around mental health, it can be challenging, and it can be, you want to give up sometimes. And so you need to have patience and persistence. And then you get through that. You can also do a review, right? So are the things we're actually doing helping? Because if they're not, then we should probably stop and maybe go back a step or two. So it's important to do that review. And then the last piece, compassion, is in our opinion also a must in some sense to advance the cause of human well-being. So we can take our experience of an internal process and the lessons learned and joys and sorrows, et cetera, and then we can share that with the world. So whether that's advising our colleagues in other companies, whether that's talking about it, whether that's writing a book, whether that's donating money, whether that's supporting in the corporate social responsibility stuff, whatever it is. But there's a ton of research, and I think it's pretty self-evident that when we are compassionate to others, give to others, help others, that also increases our own well-being. And it's also linked to employee satisfaction, employee engagement, trust in the company, and all that kind of stuff.
Of all the 5Cs, which one takes the most amount of time from your perspective? And what's a typical timeline to implement this process?
It depends on the size of the organization, of course, and the level of commitment. But typically, our experience has been 6 to 12 months, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then it can kind of go with, depending on, again, the situation, the success of it, ongoing follow-up and coaching and guidance.
Yeah.
But our goal really is teach the teacher kind of thing, right? Or train the trainer. We want to develop teachers and trainers. We don't want to have, this is about empowering people. And so the organization has,
Yeah, so what you're saying is it's not about bringing somebody in and doing the work, and then when you walk away, you always are dependent on that person. The goal
Right.
is to look at the organization and the human behavior and use the psychology and emotional intelligence in the best way possible to empower people to be able to live those different state of life and affair that you call it.
Yeah, and then it becomes part of the culture, part of the way the organization just functions. Another way you could think of it is learning how to implement best practices in workplace mental health. And then the core word there is practice. We know this personally. If I'm not practicing meditation, if I'm not practicing calling my mentors and my support people, if I'm not walking the talk, then I lose it quick. And so it's the same thing in an organization. If you're not practicing the principles that you claim to want to implement or embody, then it's more just yappity yap kind of thing. So each one of those modules does have, again, it'll fluctuate depending on the environment, the situations, but typically there's a training for each module. There's scorecards and score sheets and sort of check marks and that kind of thing, and workshops and that for each module.
And so I'm curious, there's a few more questions that I wanted to ask. One was, what is your approach to mental health within your organization? What are some of the things you do to keep a check on it, personally and as an organization?
Personally, and I am learning to walk this line better, I need to remember that other people don't have the same relationship to mental health problems that I do in my past. So for me, in some sense, it's a matter of life and death, right? Or it's a matter of intense suffering or living an enjoyable life. So for me, it's that serious. And so nothing is more important to me than taking care of my mental health. And it may sound silly, but my wife's not more important. My kids are not more important, because if I'm not taking care of myself, then I lose what I have, which is then I become a miserable person and I can't be a dad and I can't be a husband. So that's my answer to that. And that helps me live a wonderful life. When it comes to our little group, our team, I think it helps that I role model that all the time. I'm also very aware of how other people are doing and what is getting in their way. I'm very open and I ask questions. I don't put pressure on people very much, because I know it is a little bit different with deadlines, as you mentioned. With accounting, I mean, deadlines can be helpful in some ways too, but so I'm careful about what does this person actually need right now from me?
Yeah.
And how can I do my best to be helpful to them? And then asking questions is huge, right? Was I a jerk, or was I unhelpful? What could I do to be more helpful? What do you need from me? And then that opens up that trust and that openness where we can have more difficult conversations that ultimately lead to better outcomes for everybody. We also have a structure for meetings. And I think this is another thing that can be easy wins for people. We don't always do it, but we have the intention to, is at the beginning of every meeting, we have a 3-minute meditation. We have a check-in where it has nothing to do with the meeting whatsoever. So it's just state feeling, a state of body sensation, and then we move on. And then we also kind of stick to our stated values. So our value is to increase human capacity for well-being. So we acknowledge that. And so that sets the tone for the meeting in a way that's really nice. And it just realigns us to our values and what we're actually meeting to do. And so it's sort of integrating it into the culture in everything we do.
Mike, do you want to just maybe take a few minutes and just do maybe 4 or 5 bullet pointers that would be useful?
I'd be happy to. I think the first thing I say, and I'm just a messenger of this ancient wisdom, life involves suffering. That is unavoidable. Where we have a choice is, what do we do with that suffering? And so I think part of what adds to people's angst and mental health problems is that they expect it to be different. It's like we have this underlying assumption that we're not supposed to suffer. So I think we need to smash that illusion to pieces. And then once we can accept the fact that life actually is difficult, it presents us with all kinds of unwanted realities. Then we are free. And you mentioned it earlier, we have a choice. We can decide how we respond to situations. So that's where the freedom and the liberation and the resilience builds from. So life is suffering, that's unavoidable, but that's actually a good thing because you have a choice then. What do you do with that? I think number two would be, this is probably my favorite quote, you can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. And that just is a reminder that you have to practice. You can't just
say that again. Say that again.
Yeah, sure. It's a wonderful one. It was drilled into my head early by my greatest mentor. You can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. If our thinking is a little bit flawed and perhaps not as, I don't know, sophisticated, then the choices we make are not going to promote our well-being. And this is particularly true for people when they're in the grips of a mental health problem. What we do is by taking actions, right? So if I just get up and go to the therapist, or if I just get up and go for a walk or call my support people or whatever it is, then my mind and my thoughts follow and I become healthier that way. So we have to lead with our actions. It's all about behavior, in my opinion. Let your actions do the talking is another way to sum it up.
Yep.
I'd say number three, if you haven't tried practicing meditation or yoga or mindfulness, these more contemplative, reflective practices, at least try, and don't just pretend to try, actually try, because I think it's very clear that these are probably the most effective ways to reduce psychological distress and to promote happiness and well-being. And I'd say the last one, number four, would be don't underestimate the power of doing things for other people. So an idea just of being of service. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but there's a beautiful Gandhi quote. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, something like that. And it's an incredible way to free yourself from a sense of loneliness, isolation, et cetera. And it doesn't have to be some grandiose, I'm going to go save 1 million people, right? It can be open the door for the next person who's walking behind you down the hallway. I mean, it's those little things. So I could probably go on, but
No, this is really helpful. Yeah, this is really helpful. And I think we want to leave the audience with something more constructive. Hopefully this was more practical and on point. And I think there are components of it which are behaviorally very difficult to anticipate and even rely on because we haven't experienced it yet. But being an accountant, I can vouch for the fact that my life drastically changed when I showed an ounce of compassion towards others rather than focused on doing things that I wanted it every single day. When I realized and started writing what are some of the things and decisions that I make that are mine and for myself versus I do it for others with any selfless act, it starts to come up that how self-absorbed our mind keeps us being. It's not who we are, it's what our mind keeps us being because it just got tuned to the idea of having the comfort. And then every time you start building that expectation around it that, life should happen the way you expect it and everything. and then the judgment kicks in and a whole bunch of other things. So I think that's a different time, a different day, a different conversation. Mike, I really want to thank you for being here. I think this has been a phenomenal learning for me. So thank you again for that. Really appreciate it. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine. And thank you.